I'm Rob Shields, and this is Peace Talks, the podcast that covers everything to do with competitive jigsaw puzzling. Thomas Kaeppeler has been at Ravensburger pretty much his entire working life, from working on the factory floor at Ravensburger headquarters in Germany to becoming president of Ravensburger North America. And we get a whole different kind of nerdy on this episode. Thomas Kaeppeler, thank you for joining Peace Talks.
Thank you for having me. Quite excited to kind of be talking to you today.
I'm deeply thankful that you're willing to spend some time with me. So let's jump in and begin at the beginning. What's your earliest puzzle memory?
My earliest puzzle memory goes way, way back. I think it's like kindergarten days. I would think it's about I was put in, my parents put me into kindergarten a bit later than what was customary in Germany at the time. I think I was 4 years old. It was mostly because like our neighbor, this is a kind of funny background story, the neighboring family, I was really good friends with their daughter, who was just a tad younger than I was. And I refused to go to kindergarten before she kind of had a chance to go to kindergarten, is what my parents are telling me. So I plain out did not want to go until like she was ready to go. And so, they kind of delayed things by about a year. And then I do remember doing that's probably one of the earliest memories I have on puzzles, is like doing a frame puzzle from Ravensburger, actually, which was a construction image. I was quite fascinated. It had lots of construction equipments, kind of excavators and all that type of stuff, construction site. That's kind of pretty much my earliest memory of puzzling.
Now, you grew up in the town where Ravensburger is actually headquartered. Is that true?
I was actually born in that town. I grew up in that town. I lived in that town pretty much all the way up until I kind of left for the US almost 28 years ago.
Normally I ask folks if puzzling was sort of a passion for their entire life, but I imagine that living in the headquarters of Ravensburger, puzzles might just be around all the time.
Yeah, puzzles are on all the time. Was what actually was more of a thing, like as I started growing up, in my circle of friends, one of my friends, his mom worked in, I believe, if I remember this properly, worked in either the Ravensburger factory or the Ravensburger office, one of those two. And she kind of would bring board games back home. And, we would spend afternoon after afternoon, when we were in our teenage years, like playing all the Ravensburger games there are, and then some. So that was a cool, we were more like in that age range, more focused on board games, more so than puzzles, actually.
My understanding is that you had at least a summer job at Ravensburger?
After I had graduated from high school, Germany at the time had a mandatory military I wouldn't call it draft, but you had to join the military for 15 months. So I did that. And then after that, I kind of went to college. And as I was going through college, and I went to college for a business/economics part, I was looking to kind of help finance my lifestyle, as a lot of college kids do. College education back in the day was fairly cheap, I would say. Nonetheless, you kind of still wanted to make some money. I've always been driven by and interested in kind of what work in general looks like. I hate theory. I learn better in doing things and kind of applying what I learn in theory and kind of seeing how that translates into the business world. So Ravensburger is not the only employer in that town. There's a couple others. So I very early on started, when you were legally allowed to do so, doing summer jobs. And then when I went to college, I was the college kids in Germany have a winter break, happens usually I think in early February, late January, early February, that's an 8-week break. And then the summer break is 12 weeks long, kind of ends at the end of June. And then you kind of get back in September or something like that, early October. And so my thinking was, and I readily admit to that, I was a pretty lazy kid at the time. I was trying to kind of optimize things. So I was well, it would be really cool if I could find a job that would keep me occupied during the entire winter break. Most of the jobs that I used to have before I kind of started working in a Ravensburger factory were 2-3 week jobs, nice money to be made in a factory somewhere or in a warehouse. And plus I liked the product, right? There was always something that I was kind of, that I had a passion for. Like it's definitely, I think most people that listen to this podcast would agree, it's definitely more interesting than kind of, working. The other large employer in town was a company that was in the fiberglass industry. So they were making like fiberglass products, like all kinds of fiberglass products. That was kind of interesting too. But I was really passionate about that. It was dirty, loud, and so on and so forth. So I was like, I just applied. I saw like an ad in the paper. Yes, there was a thing when I was a kid. Like there was newspapers, like real newspapers, where you would look at ads and companies would advertise. And so like I applied for a job, and the way the business in the toy industry works and operates is like you build up inventory towards the busy season, which is before Christmas, and then you deplete that inventory because it's all shipping out to retailers. Like about 70% of our 70, sometimes 80%, depends on the category, of our products sell like that time of year. And then you need the ramp up process again, where you're building inventory. You're basically making product that you're putting into a warehouse, kind of, you're refreshing inventory. And Ravensburger was the only company in town that actually was looking for employees that would be willing and able to work for like 8 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks straight. So that kind of drew me, first and foremost, decided the passion for the product. That drew me in. And I was like, this is really cool. I can work the entire winter. The kind of climate over there is, I'm based in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. So like that's about an hour north of Boston. So New England proper. The climate very similar to here, like the winter's cold and snowy. There's not much to do when you're on winter break as a college kid. There's two things that you can do. You can either learn and study, or you can go work, or you can do nothing. Basically, that's the options that you have. And I was like, that's really cool. I can make some money, I can work, and then make enough money so I don't have to work during the summer break if I don't want to, and kind of hang out with my friends, study, and or just enjoy like a great summer break, right? That was kind of the idea.
I was thinking, gosh, you said you were lazy, and then you ran off and had a job at a time where you probably didn't necessarily need to have a job. But then you're saying that you're planning for summer casualness. I say less lazy, more strategic.
Strategic is probably the right word. And I wanted to kind of make my own money. I just didn't want to solely depend on my parents, right? And my parents instilled that very, very early on into me anyway. So it worked out great. Like that was the thing that got me going. I thought it was really interesting. I mean, manufacturing at the time was very, very different. But that was my almost like reconnecting to the puzzles topic during that first job that I had there. They were running at the time the factory in Germany in 2 shifts. So like, there was an early morning shift and a later at night shift. Like they would, I think the late night shift would end at 10 or 11 p.m. Like it would start at 2 in the afternoon, give or take. And the early morning shift would start at 5 o'clock in the morning. I think that was kind of the time frame, and run till 1 or 2 in the afternoon, give or take. So a lot of processes that these days happen either with machinery that assists or are somewhat more automated, weren't as automated back then. So like I actually worked in what they called, and are still calling, the pre-production department. And the pre-production department was basically, or in an area where they were like laminating, the top sheets to the cardboard and die cutting. And it was a performance-based income. So like you had an hourly rate. There was like your fixed income, and the faster you worked, the more money you made.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much that was the incentive, right? Now, like I was fortunate and unfortunate, talking about the lazy kid that I kind of was. I was partnered up with a very seasoned worker down in the factory that was driven by money. So he would run that machine that we were working on, like, at 150 to 160% of like actually what was required. And then he would take a break and have a glass of beer and kind of smoke a cigarette or two. Yes, there was still drinking at the time in the factory.
Different time, different place.
Yeah, that is like very different time, very different place. And I was, in some cases, I was soaked. I was just sweating bullets like down there. It was, number one, it was warm. It was, taxing work, like, heavy lifting. Cardboard, you very quickly learn is not, is heavy. especially when you bulk it up and you're kind of lifting
Hmm.
stacks of cardboard onto and into a machine. There's also, when it's not the finished product, it's easy to have paper cuts on your hands and things like that. So your hands will hurt, like all those things. However, it was great money making. Ultimately, that was the thing that kind of was really cool. Like, since that guy that I was working with kind of, ran it so fast, the incentives were pretty awesome. So like it was a pretty cool thing to do. And it was all like where I was, it was mostly puzzles. Like we did on that machine, we made some games as well. Like that was the first, I had several of those. That was the first of those. Like it was mostly puzzles that we made. And a lot of those frame puzzles that were my kindergarten memories. And those are especially heavy to lift when you kind of have to lift them onto machinery. So like that was kind of just interesting. And then like you're in a factory, obviously, and you see the other products that are being made, and you get to in breaks like sit with employees and kind of do some of them, play some of them, kind of
Hmm.
do some quality control, like all that type of stuff. So you get a very intricate understanding of one, like how a factory works, like what that environment is like, and kind of a first step also as to like how this business operated and still operates to a degree.
I love the idea of playing games or assembling a puzzle as quality control during your breaks.
It's still happening when you're going down there into the factory. They're still putting puzzles together for quality control purposes. There's a lot of cameras these days and other things that allow you to kind of check whether your quality is on par,
Hmm.
and hitting benchmarks. But there's still the manual touch where, puzzles are being put together to ensure that the fit is right and everything's kind of just the way it's supposed to be. And yes, people do have, this. I mean, factory workers have lunch breaks too. And when you're kind of making product that's kind of fun to kind of play with, it's natural that, people will start playing during their lunch break or whatever break they have.
This gave you a lot of insight into the running of a factory, and you're already going to school for a business related degree.
Yeah.
Do you come right back to Ravensburger after you graduate?
I pretty much did. I did 2 or 3 of those jobs. My then girlfriend had just started working for Ravensburger in their book publishing department, a job that was leading up to an editorial position straight away. So like, there was lots of training. She learned about accounting, like, and all those things that you learn about in business. And every
Hmm.
time we talked, I was like, she's doing really interesting stuff. So I applied for an internship, sat in front of the HR director at the time. And then he said, in which department would you want to do an internship? And I kind of, the first thing that kind of came to mind that I came to regret later was like, I said accounting.
It turned out not to be your life's passion.
No, it turned out not to be my life's passion, although I learned a good deal about accounting. I have to tell you that as well.
Yeah.
So, the summer after, I had an internship for 3 months. I was really, really proud and excited actually of that opportunity. It was during a time when I'm dating myself here, but when a lot of companies, at least in Germany, started introducing personal computers. The accounting department at the time, unfortunately, did not have a computer. They had lots of lists and paper to go through and lots of tedious, just kind of, checking whether the numbers were accurate with the calculator and all those things. That right next to the accounting department was the demand planning and forecasting department. And they had a computer, and we always would go out and have lunch together. And so, like, at some point in time, I was like, man, like, I wish I could kind of move my internship over there and kind of work for those guys. That would be really cool. So I kind of just ultimately dared to go to the department head in accounting, saying like, would you mind like if I took half the time that was allotted for the internship and kind of started working for those guys? And he said, yeah, go do that. So I did, and that was the first step where I really got to apply what I was learning
Hmm.
in college. Like we also had like we were working on computers there, all of that. They sent me over to market research and said like they have a project that they need help with, and we figured, computer work, all that type of stuff. Why don't you help them out for 2 weeks? Last part of the internship, like you go there and you help them. So they brought me in to help him with a project on a particular, I think it was the Labyrinth game. at Ravensburger is known for, that they were in the process of developing at the time, and kind of they were doing focus group testing with people that love board games. And at the end of the 2 weeks, when I was about to leave, he said, "Well, would you want to come back and kind of just work for us here in the office?" And I was like, "That would be awesome. Like, yes, sign me up. Like, whatever it is. Like, I would love to help you guys." And that was my first. That was the way into kind of number one for the transitioning from a job where I worked in a factory purely for the most part to make money into
Hmm.
something where I could apply my kind of skills that I was learning in college. I mean, who would not, when you're going to college for a business degree and you're hearing that you can work in a market research department, who would not be excited about that, right?
Right.
I was fully over the moon. I was like, this is the coolest thing that you could ever kind of line up.
So you are a Ravensburger lifer, really?
In a good way, yes.
Yeah, yeah, no, in a great way. So at some point, you're at Ravensburger, and the decision is made to put more emphasis on the North America line of business. So you come over as part of that process to establish a more formal understanding in North America. I would love to hear just a little bit about how that came up, why Ravensburger decided to put that energy in, and then how that got stood up from your perspective.
To this day, basically, the Ravensburger world is in the way we distribute our products is like we either have like a subsidiary in the country, or in lots of other countries, like we don't cover the entire world with our own subsidiaries. In countries where we do not have our own subsidiaries, there's distributors in a lot of those countries. Like we cover a good chunk of the world, not everything. And at some point in time, Ravensburger decided to set up their own subsidiary in this market. That was always the strategic intent. Like when I joined, like when they were still working with a distributor, like the business wasn't big enough to support a Ravensburger owned structure. And then the board at the time made that decision and said, we are there. Like, we kind of want to build this kind of, or like we want to continue this ourselves. In a nutshell, I was at the time pretty much the only one in the company that knew anything about this market here. And then in those discussions, they were like, would you be interested in moving to the US and kind of helping build the business from there on out? And then my wife and I looked at each other and said, that's an awesome opportunity. Why not? And the rest is history, still here.
I'm interested in understanding the relationship between Ravensburger Global and Ravensburger North America when it comes to things like the Jigsaw Puzzle catalog. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how Global and North America relate when it comes to products like Jigsaw puzzling.
I'll start with what we used to be doing and then kind of what we are doing in the meantime. We used to do a lot of like, we had this belief that the taste here of the North American, or I would say even more specific, US puzzle consumer or puzzler was very different than the taste of the German or Italian or French puzzler. I would say looking back, not entirely correct, but that was the
Mm,
belief. And so like we had our own product development team here in the US that would kind of develop puzzles specifically for the US market. Most of what we were doing when I started up until I would say about 2 or 3 years ago was mostly building a puzzle catalog that was driven by a North American product development team and augmenting the selection with imagery that we felt we could take from the European, I'm going to call it European or global catalog, that we felt made sense. Not everything does make sense. Some things like we would not engage with to say like, subjective belief in a lot of cases, like this isn't going to work. Or we tried something and said like, this image direction is not going to work in this market. And then came to the conclusion also because the business over here had grown so much in the US or in all of North America. We at some point in time also went then straight to retail in Canada. So like that is what turned this into Ravensburger North America. Came to the conclusion that a lot of the things that we were doing here in North America echoed in Europe
mm,
or like with
mhm.
Ravensburger Global. And there was much more of an appetite for what we were doing. And also at the same time, a more level setting of like, puzzler tastes, in like of like what they were developing in Europe, like what we could take in to the North American market. So both of those kind of worked hand in hand. So like what the structure in the meantime is like we don't really have product development per se here in North America. So like in a sheer product development capacity, we have, as part of my team, like we have a product marketing manager or brand manager, you could call them, that kind of
Hmm.
steers the puzzle portfolio, that kind of looks at art, that in some cases helps with artist briefing. So she has a strong background in product development. And we also are the ideation pipeline for the global team, in the sense of saying, and here is an artist, or here's art that you should be developing puzzles for. This is what you should look at. This is echoing in this market. So like, it's a kind of two-way street where we get ideas from the global team, we give feedback, and at the same time we give them ideas, we get feedback from them, and then kind of it's a more collaborative work style where the two entities kind of come together. And the global team, when I'm saying that, is also like, it used to be very much centered in Germany. It's not centered in Germany anymore. Like we have execution teams and brand managers in France and Italy, everywhere where Ravensburger has subsidiaries. So like, there's a lot of influences that kind of come together when we are concepting a puzzle line and workshops that are happening. So it's become much more of a collaborative work environment where ideas that North America brings to the table are being listened to. Obviously, because the market here is so big, there's a big business potential, but also then European ideas that we might have not engaged with in the past, where we felt like they aren't meaningful for the market, we discovered actually they are.
Do you have an example of something that you would not normally have considered for the US market, but turns out to be something that you ended up feeling like was a good fit?
A good fit, a good example is like we would for the longest time not engage in photographed landscapes, so like photography
Classic.
of anything for the most part. Also due to the fact that when I started over here in the early days, like a lot of the, Kodak puzzles is something that people will remember. I
Mhm.
think they're still around to a degree, or that license was all photographed images, and they were all dirt cheap. The quality was poor. The puzzles were cheap. It wasn't a good consumer experience, a puzzling experience. And so like our pricing wasn't lined up to kind of do that properly. Like high quality puzzles and puzzles that echoed with kind of, the real puzzle enthusiasts in this market over here were all illustrated art. And the illustrations were the thing that we focused on. So in the meantime, actually, we are seeing that when photography is done really well, there's actually a market for this, like, and a meaningful market for it. So like, there's a thing for everyone, right? And just being, exclusionary and saying like, well, we're not going to provide photographies of something is not the right attitude either. But that's probably the best example that I have for things that kind of we initially did not think were worth our while, and that actually have filtered in and are doing really well. I'll give you a good example. We have a puzzle on Amazon. It's called Church Lane that was concepted in Europe. For the longest time, like this was something that we had overlooked, like we did not bring that into the market. And when we saw the image, like as we were going through our product lineups and kind of trying to figure out where are some white spaces that we have in products that we might have overlooked that we are not bringing in, we kind of looked at that one and we said, oh, maybe this is not the right thing, but we'll try it anyways. It's one of the best selling puzzles that we have, out of the blue.
It sounds like you guys have spent a lot of time really trying to understand imagery and what works where.
Yeah.
And it also sounds like the catalogs are related but independent in a way. Like you can
Yes.
take imagery from Europe, Europe can
Yeah.
take imagery from you. It's collaborative, but in the end, you make the decisions for what you do here. They make the decisions for what they do there. Is that true?
That is true. And it comes with a caveat in some cases. The simple fact sometimes is that artists might not be able to give us kind of
Mhm.
global image rights, right? Like you have art, like especially if it's illustrated art, even photography in some cases, an artist might have signed rights away to another puzzle company here in North America, and not Ravensburger, and is offering rights to just a couple countries, all countries in Europe. And then Europe, if they feel like this is strong enough to kind of have a business case for it to kind of be producing, we will not be able to kind of bring this product in just because we don't have any rights for that particular image. Licenses, some Disney IP, some other licenses. Pokemon is a good example. We don't have the same breadth of licensing rights here in North America. North America again, then we cannot bring certain images in, although
Yeah.
in some cases we would like to.
In talking with various artists around the idea of creating art for puzzles, I've heard a couple of things that I think that are super interesting that I want to explore with you. One is that there is a concept of trends in puzzling. Like you guys do some work to identify what is trending that people might be interested in doing puzzles on.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. And then it sounds like you guys also have a strong perspective on what makes a good puzzle to puzzle, especially when it comes to illustrated art. And I'm wondering if that is something that exists formally or if that's just folks on the team who have years and years of experience indicating what it is that they think is going to work well.
The quick answer is like there is no formal process. Like
Mhm.
it's actually a lot of it is experience.
Yeah,
It's not rocket science either. Puzzles need a lot of image detail. I have a wife that has a bit more time than I do. That is an avid puzzler. Usually, when she puzzles, she will point out like any. She's my own worst critic. Sometimes she will point out things that still aren't right, or like that she feels it like too difficult. It's a very fine balance on puzzle imagery that you're striking in the sense of you have someone, you want to have a lot of detail, color variation, detail, things that are different from each other. Unless you have a puzzler that is looking for something really challenging, like the puzzlers that puzzle to relax, it's an immersive experience, right? You have an image where you want to discover something as you're puzzling. It's not just about the puzzling experience or like puzzling itself. If you distill the puzzle experience down to what the real experience is there's things to think about, there's things to see in an image, there's things to discover. If you can go as far as hiding Easter eggs in a puzzle image, like things that, aren't obvious at first glance, all those things need very careful calibration, like when you're briefing artists. And a lot of those don't necessarily exist in the general art that is out there. So like
sure.
we had also moved on to something where we would buy art from art agencies just without changing it and saying, as we were looking at puzzling and the puzzle experience and saying like, what really makes us unique is certainly our quality, and the cut of the puzzles and no dust in the packaging and all those things. But what also provides a really good experience, or what should provide a really good experience, is the detail provided with the image, and that detail needs to be there. And so, we've started doing a lot more kind of custom art briefings with artists that we work with and saying like, and we'd like to have an image. This is the vision that a product manager has. We have a vision for what that image should look like. We have a general idea on the topic. Can you create something for us? And then it's like, the artist and the product development person like sync up every other week or so, and they kind of look at the progression. And then it's like, can you add something here? Can you do something there? And this particular part of the image is like too dark or too light, or like there's not enough variation. We need to put something else there. It's a very elaborate process that they're kind of going through, which kind of, on one hand, slows things a bit down. It's also a bit more expensive to kind of do it that way. On the other hand, it provides for a truly unique puzzle experience on a finished image and something that's very custom to what we do.
Yeah, one of the things I love about, for example, Nathaniel Mortenson's art is that it encompasses a lot of the things that you're talking about, like Easter eggs, depth.
Yeah,
Like it's a piece of work that you feel like you could really spend some time with beyond
yeah,
just trying to,
yeah,
get the pieces together and knock it out.
yeah, exactly. It's always there's a vision. Like I think what the secret sauce here really is the eye of a product manager, product development person, understanding what puzzlers really like. Obviously, you need to have a feeling for trends, because like everything else is driven by trends. Like it's not the same, like what worked 10 years ago is not necessarily the same thing that's echoing with puzzlers now. And at the same time, like a true eye for art and for detail. All those things kind of come together. That's kind of where the secret sauce is. It's really in the people that kind of work with artists, like, and the artists themselves, obviously, that work with artists day in, day out.
You talked about doing play testing earlier. Do you do play testing with puzzles at all, or is it just put a lot of research into it, try and make the best product possible, and then ship it?
Well, we do some. It depends on topic. Sometimes it's a quick, we go to art shows. We still talk to art agencies. We look at what art agencies do. Like there's all kinds of trade shows where you can go and kind of check what's trending in art in general, in art style. And then in some cases, when we are not entirely sure, we will put something in front of some consumers and ask them for feedback to kind of make sure that, we're on the right track. But in other cases, when we feel like we are certain that, this will hit the mark, we're also more than happy to kind of experiment and try. There's a lot of things that you can do with research. This is the market research guy that kind of I was when I was back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
You can do a lot of things with research, but ultimately also have to trust your own experience and kind of sometimes just that is what business is all about. Be entrepreneurial and try things. Sometimes things that you think don't work, you only discover in that process, like in kind of saying, okay, well, we're not so sure this will work, but let's kind of just give it a shot and see whether this will work. And, I've had some really good experiences with that. And some where product failed and, it didn't echo. And then, you move on.
Now, you guys produce all your puzzles in Europe, is that correct?
99.9% of our puzzles are made in Europe. Yeah, we've got two factories, like one is in Germany and one is in the Czech Republic. The German factory makes everything, like it changes every so often a little bit. Mostly adult puzzles are being made, like, anything like, shouldn't say adult puzzles, like 100 pieces and up are made in the German factory, and like everything below 100 piece count like comes out of the Czech Republic. We just lately kind of got into that, like special products, like where packaging for the one or other reason is important. It's mostly either on the kid side when it's trend topics, where we want special packaging that's not easy. I'll give you a good example. Shaped boxes. You cannot properly make in Europe at a feasible price point to consumers, like completely overpriced, like we're just not set up as a company to kind of make them in Europe that way efficiently. Then we kind of go to China or other places where you can make them. But it is the one or other. It's not really the lion's share of our puzzles. As I said, 99.9% currently still coming out of the two factories in Europe.
But it does strike me then that you're making relatively big bets when it comes to new art, because it's got to, you're not producing here in the United States. You're probably not set up to produce small runs of anything, or at least historically.
Yeah.
So if you run something, it's got to be big enough that it can be, at least distributed throughout the US. So if you haven't had a chance to actually try it out, you're making a fairly sizable bet.
Yes, that is true. I mean, it fairly sizable, yes. But the technology has also been changing. So these days there's digital printing that you can kind of use. One of the biggest parts of that bet is usually printing. It's an expensive process. And, when you look at the machinery in Germany, like your typical printing machine kind of will run at like, 20,000 sheets an hour or something like that. So like, you push that button, you hit start. Before you know it, like you've printed like 4,000 sheets, right? And calibrating that machinery is expensive, and the people that work there are expensive employees for all the right reasons. So that's where the bet is now. If you can kind of scale that and you kind of move from a traditional mass printing capability in a factory to one that's digital printing, some of those things kind of have lately been changing quite surprisingly, where you can kind of make puzzles at much lower kind of minimum order quantities or minimum bets than kind of what you would have seen like 5-10 years ago.
So I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but I imagine historically that has meant that if you're doing puzzles in competitions, that you would be required on older machinery to do big runs. So they probably had to show up in catalogs.
Yes.
With the ability of doing more smaller, tighter runs, is that enabling more custom work for competitions in general, or will that sort of unlock that in the future?
It, for all intents and purposes, it should. It's actually been a conversation that we had through email just today. talking about competitions and kind of how many puzzles we can provide for competitions, what that will look like. I learned something about digital printing literally like early on this week, and kind of what minimum amounts in on a digital printing machine look like, which kind of changed the world for me. I wasn't like I'm not an engineer,
Hmm.
right? And sometimes like the setup in a company changes, and then you learn about it, and then you're saying, okay, like where's the application? Like how can we turn this into making our business better? And what at least the first indication that I'm getting is that yes, that should be a very feasible process to kind of dial this up if we wanted to.
Let's jump back then to how Ravensburger got involved in competitions to begin with. So I saw Reddit Ask Me Anything that you did in 2019, which is great.
Yes.
People should go check it out. And you mentioned that somebody mentioned something about competitions, and you were like, "Oh yeah, where would you like to see those in libraries and hobby stores? Like, what makes sense for you?" You're sort of exploring the space. So it seemed like something that was in 2019 January already on your mind. I would
Yeah.
love to hear how Ravensburger got the itch to do something in the competitive space, and then how that evolved into maybe the first actual competition you guys ended up sponsoring.
I'll give you a bit of a longer history. It's kind of like, everyone that's talking about speed puzzling competitions and or puzzling events, not necessarily always the same, right?
Mhm.
Um, thinks this is a fairly new thing. To a degree, it is certainly at the scale it's currently at. It is. It was a thing back when I started, when I was still in that international sales job. Our distributor in Canada was like one of the first ones, like around the globe, that kind of did puzzling events, speed puzzling events, actually. Like it was timed. And I remember that kind of got me started with the whole idea. Like as I was talking to that sales team over there were two women, fairly young at the time, that won 2 years in a row, and the prize for winning the competition in Canada was like a trip to the factory in Germany
Mm.
and a dinner with Thomas. The only problem was they only spoke French, and I didn't speak any French. So like then it was a bit quiet. Like basically we had to talk with our hand and our feet. It was pretty fun. And I was like at the time, my mind was blown in hearing that they were able to do 1,000 piece puzzle in like, I think it was like less than 2 hours, just a tad below 2 hours, something like that, right?
Do you recall roughly what year this would be?
That probably was in, I would say, 1996
Okay.
ish, give or take.
Mhm.
1995, 1996. I moved in 1998, so like it was about 3 years before I moved to the US. Then we kind of did those a couple times in the US, and kind of, I would almost say, like lost track. It was something like we had lots of priorities, lots of things to do, and kind of just couldn't do everything. Lost track of that, and then as we kind of saw the puzzle business building, in the years like between 2000 and I would say like coming is like starting with the financial crisis in 2008 was one of those first like where puzzles all of a sudden, because like everyone thought the ceiling was gonna cave in. you know when the economy isn't doing well, generally speaking, puzzles actually as a business do pretty well for all the reasons that I think are pretty obvious. We saw the puzzle business building. And then in 2019, or like towards that, we also had a much larger team as the organization here was growing. So like we had more marketing people. We kind of started ideating around like what we at the time loosely called a puzzle convention. We wanted to do our own puzzle convention. That was the idea.
Mhm.
And in 2019, when I had done that Ask Me Anything on Reddit, we had pretty much concepted everything out. We had a venue somewhere, I think it was Minneapolis, if I'm not wrong, somewhere in that area for the summer of 2020.
Hmm.
And you know what happened in 2020? So like, we were like pretty much all there. We had the venue booked, we had everything lined up, and then it kind of came to a very unexpected and shuddering halt, right? That all kind of, as the world shut down, like that all ended right then and there. And so like we kind of disengaged. Number one, like during the pandemic, like even if you had wanted to do speed puzzling events, and if we could have done that, we could have not done it because the demand for puzzles was infinite. Like we didn't have any puzzles to begin with. Like what came in shipped right out. Like it was
Yeah.
like for like almost an entire year, like we just couldn't feed the appetite and the demand in the marketplace. So like we could have not engaged in a puzzling event to begin with. Um, Coming out at the tail end of the pandemic, we hired a new marketing person on my team, and one of her first questions was, so like, what are my priorities? Like in my new job here as the puzzle marketing manager, what should I be doing? And we started discussing again like this puzzle convention idea, saying like, this kind of, we had to stop it. Like, now that people are getting vaccinated and kind of, everything seems to kind of slowly be getting back to normal. You should look at that again. Very quickly, we had lots of discussions, really, really good discussions and conversations. We came to the conclusion that doing our own thing was actually not really what we wanted to do anymore. We felt
Mm.
like we should make this more of an inclusive, in the sense of not us as a, yes, while we wanted to be the brand that promoted speed puzzling on scale and like doing something. We got fortunate. We also had learned that the U.S. National Jigsaw Organization like got founded. So like, our marketing manager Robin had learned about that. She got in contact with them. We were like, okay, now there is a team. And when there's an organization, it's run by volunteers and all that type of stuff. We do want to be the primary sponsor, but like we don't necessarily need to make this our own event where only Ravensburger is allowed and no one else. So like having our competition, friendly, unfriendly, whatever,
Hmm.
participate in that as well, and having everyone join, I think makes sense, because that's truly then the idea of a puzzle convention. It shouldn't all be just based on brand. We are very protective of our brand. We are very proud of what we are doing, but ultimately like our product should and does have its own merits. So like if what we're doing is truly right, I think like we are going to excel in the marketplace where there's competition anyways. Certainly out at retail there's competition. So we got going, like I think it was like the in December of 2022 with the first US National Jigsaw competition in San Diego. Concepted what that should look like together with that team, what the event, was going to look like, what kind of puzzles we were going to do, like, the live stream, like all those things that also all of a sudden became a thing during and after the pandemic, kind of that you had as potential marketing opportunities that got us going. And ever since, I'm just astounded by how big this has become.
I love that you did an interview on the live stream in 2022 at the first competition. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about that interview is that you were visibly thrilled about the scale of the competition that was going on in front of you. I think it was the individuals finals. I think there was only finals that year. I think that there were 99 people in that competition. And so it was great that it seemed to be like hitting your vision, but also it was just the very beginning of where
Yeah.
this was going. So, fast forward to 2026 US Nationals, we're looking at over 1,000 participants,
Yes.
800 just in individuals,
Yeah.
and everything sold out really fast, and there's a long waiting list. So,
Yeah.
like, the kind of first kernel of interest that you had in the competitive convention space definitely seemed to hit the mark.
Yeah, I think so too. And I'm actually really happy to see that. Sometimes you have like this wasn't founded in any, we were talking focus groups and research earlier. This was more like founded in a belief and an idea that we had rather than true knowledge and like doing focus groups with consumers. We just like, it's like when you sit and you have brainstorm meetings and you're saying, what else could we do? What could be meaningful? Like, what would people be interested in? It all started with something that we saw echoing, which is why I was referring to puzzle events. Forget speed puzzling just for a second. Um, every time we had done puzzling events, mostly before we got into the whole speed puzzling kind of, ideation and concept and thought process, we would do, events either at local toy stores or like local libraries and things like that. And I do vividly remember that really brought this to the forefront in my thinking. I think it was like in, let me think, 2015, 2016, give or take. One of our accountants had actually solicited the local library where our office used to be for a puzzling event. we had kind of sent the library puzzles. They would have the puzzles out for anyone to puzzle, and they kind of were doing an event, a puzzling event that night. And he called me, like he sent an email on saying, like, I feel a bit ill-equipped. I'm the accountant here. I feel a bit ill-equipped, like just doing this by myself. Like, can anyone help and join after hours? And I said, I'll do that. Like, I'm kind of curious. I'll kind of go there with you. When I told my wife, she was like, well, that's going to be a long night. And it certainly was. Like, I think I got home at like almost midnight.
Mm.
I have to tell you, I was like at that local library, like, I was there to kind of give a speech, tell people about our puzzles that were engaged there. I was just astounded by the conversations, by just the atmosphere. There was a dad there with his three daughters that kind of were puzzling and talking to me, talking to each other. Like, there were just really nice conversations. When I got home that night, my wife said that was a really long night. And I said, yeah, one of the most exciting ones in my career, actually.
Really?
I was like, I really saw something happening there, which was entirely not based on speed, right? This was not about like who's going to be done
Yep.
first. This was just puzzling at its purest, I would say. Not that speed puzzling is not pure, but it was puzzling really the way puzzling is meant to be. And then we kind of took it from there and said, like, that kind of got us all going and saying, like, we're doing those, like, they are always booked out. Like, whenever the libraries that we're working with or the toy stores that we're working with and just doing puzzling events are like having something out there in the open saying, like, we're offering a puzzling event. People sign up and, there's no space, you can't, like, if you don't book right away, like, you can't even get in. And then we said, like, we should make this bigger. Like, that was the whole thing that started that. We should make this bigger. And as we were talking about bigger, we were talking about, well, this idea of like, they did that in Canada 25 years ago. Like, could we do something around speed, the competitiveness of puzzling? That kind of brought that speed puzzling idea up. And so the rest is, wouldn't say history, it's history in the making.
At the same time, not at the same time, but sort of in parallel, Ravensburger Global is involved with the Worlds competition, which starts up
Yes.
in
Yeah.
2019. Were you keeping an eye on what was going on there? And do you guys, the two different branches of Ravensburger, talk much on the competition front, or at least at that time?
At the time, we really did. Like, we were talking, but we clearly weren't talking enough at the time. Like, we had heard about the kind of, world championships in Spain. And, we got a recap of what those were like. And we were like, yeah, that's interesting. In the meantime, the marketing manager that kind of was getting this off the ground with the team from the US National Jigsaw Association is now in a global role. So part of what she does now is like holding together all the speed puzzling competitions around the world. Not just the worlds in Spain, but the Canadian one, the US one, the one in Italy, the one in Switzerland, the one in Germany, so on and so forth. So we very quickly realized that there was more to it. Like, the world was interesting initially, or the world's competition. Like, we weren't really clear, was that a world competition or was it just in Spain? And like, it was more like a local Spanish competition.
Yep.
But we very quickly learned it was year one. And then we were like, yeah, there's something there. We kind of definitely need to kind of get together as a team. And I told you about our restructuring of the company, and like how we kind of started working with our product development teams, and kind of how we were looking at this business had changed as well. So like, we weren't working as much in silos as we used to.
You said, and I missed the key, like, couple of words there, that you had somebody overseeing competitive puzzling in general. Is that a new development, or was that a development that had been going on for quite some time?
Fairly new in the sense of that we kind of all tethered it together in a global capacity. So like, as we were seeing speed puzzling events kind of taking the world by storm, no pun intended, we kind of felt, we wanted to kind of make sure that we were doing, from a brand perspective, the same thing everywhere, or as much as possible, the same thing everywhere, while being true to a local methodology. Like, there's certain things that they're doing at speed puzzling events in Switzerland where, we hadn't thought of. Like, the local team always brings a local flavor to things. And we felt like we could all learn from each other. Like, if there's one person that kind of has the, call it, oversight and visibility to like what's happening everywhere and steering what's happening everywhere, we can then kind of streamline our product development efforts for speed puzzling, like the concepts or the things that work at speed puzzling events, avoid the things that actually do not work, things like that, having that kind of all hauled together by one person that everyone has access to. Has actually been quite meaningful. We've learned a thing or two, and kind of we have a couple ideas of like what else we could do for future speed puzzling events that we've seen in other countries that we have not done yet. I'm not going to talk more about that. That would be a spoiler alert, and I don't want to do that at that stage. But
All right, well, I'll have to ask you about it later. Because up through this last year, it
mhm.
definitely feels like the experience at Worlds and the experience going on at US Nationals, at Canadian Nationals is different qualitatively, right? It feels like different companies are really running them because Ravensburger comes to Worlds in a different posture than they come to US Nationals.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so like that causes a lot of like there are a lot of things that the US does well. There's a
Mhm.
lot of things that worlds that have been challenging.
Mhm.
And as you said, there's a lot of opportunity for cross learning. So it's sort of surprising that it has been so different of an experience with Ravensburger, especially given how invested you guys appear to be in all of these events.
Well, look, I think the simple reason for why the posture appears to be different has been that that marketing manager that's now in a global role that was on my team before that I was talking about had the advantage of a team at the US National Jigsaw organization that just kind of, got together and kind of started this kind of, organization here in the US. So like we got in from the ground up, right? That was a very close and still is a very, very close partnership, very friendly partnership, lots of ideas, lots of discussions, lots of like, us basically saying, we love this idea. What can we do to help? We have our ideas, like how do we make this the best thing possible for the US. That was the initial driver. We just looked at it from like, for my team, like here in North America, we looked at it from a purely North American perspective. And how do we make this for our market that we are in charge of? How do we make this the biggest thing possible? We saw the marketing angle for it. Like we saw just the engagement and the awareness for the brand as like, all the things that we had always wanted to do. What happened on the global side, you also have to take into account, like, Ravensburger's brand awareness for puzzles is very different by country. In Germany, like Ravensburger's market share is like 70 or 75%. You can ask anyone on the street, pretty much almost anyone on the street. And, 75% of people will know, if not more, will know Ravensburger for puzzles, right? So there's certain things that when you have this kind of 140-year history and this brand awareness, like, like with Thomas, like where he grew up as a kid in kindergarten doing a Ravensburger jigsaw puzzle, we don't have that luxury necessarily yet here in North America or in the US specifically. We are not like, well, we are one of the top 3 puzzle manufacturers in this country or like
Mhm.
puzzle suppliers in this country. We are not the number one. So like we have a very different market position here still. So like from that perspective, there's also then when companies or when local teams engage, and the initial effort in engaging with Worlds was very much one that was driven by a team based in Germany. It's a very different approach sometimes. And that's what we were trying to avoid in like bringing a marketing manager in that oversees then everything. You have a very different approach to things as you do in another country where your brand awareness is, or the awareness for your puzzle brand is not as high.
It sounds like what you're saying is that in the US, in North America in general, there's more of a hunger there to because there's more to achieve, right? Like you're not, it's not a given that you
Yeah.
are the market leader. Whereas in Spain and Europe, maybe there's more of a, we already are well established. We already know who we are. Everybody else knows who we are. So, it's a different level of engagement that really does show in the brand impact I feel like that Ravensburger gets out of each of those events though, right? It's like in the US, I feel like the impact of Ravensburger bringing unreleased puzzles at every level of the competition and has, as near as I can tell from the onset, you have a team that hits the floor very visibly. There's not anything like that at Worlds. And so you can see the sort of slippage the last couple of years in terms of Ravensburger, people's perspective of Ravensburger, especially in Worlds, because of that missing drive that the North America team seems to have.
Yeah. I think that will be changing also for Worlds. Like, lots of like you bringing up all the points that we have been talking about internally when we got the recaps then from Worlds, where our team here, that's then what happens, where our team here then said, like, why are they not, why the Ravensburger employees that go, they're not wearing Ravensburger t-shirts and are visible as Ravensburger staff. But it's natural, I think, in the course of business, and all really good in kind of like saying, okay, like, well, let's take, and certainly this was the masterpiece over here, I would say. Again, no pun intended. Um, in executing like and there's still lots of things that you can do in executing on a speed puzzle championship, and then kind of taking best practices and learnings and applying them back to like something like Worlds or to other markets. And not every market then sees the same potential right away. You have this in business all the time. Like we have this in our own team, and we have discussions about where we should take the business when we brainstorm. Sometimes not everyone shares the same idea, and there's hesitation, and there's concerns, and it's just what happens. But we're I think in a really good spot. Like everyone is kind of clearly seeing the numbers speak for themselves. Is clearly seeing what this does, and the engagement of the puzzle fan community speaks for itself. I think that's the most important one.
Well, tell me a little bit more about that, because I'm curious to really understand what Ravensburger gets out of, especially North America, out of the level of the seeming level of investment that you guys put into it. Obviously, as you said, there's a market share to try and close in on in North America, but it's also a fairly niche event. Is this really about creating some better brand awareness and brand affinity throughout the country, or is it really about tactical sales of specific puzzles on the spot? Like, where does this fit for you guys in terms of how it lives with your business?
It actually starts with, forget the marketing angle for a second. What it really does, I think it allows us to, including myself, I haven't been able to, and unfortunately I won't be able to this year because I have to be in Germany for meetings like where we're discussing the lineup for next year, not just puzzles, during the same time. But what it lets us do is engaging with a fascinating community of number one puzzle enthusiasts. They're all puzzle enthusiasts. Yes, they have a special knack for speed puzzling and competitive puzzling, but they still are puzzlers. So you get like, it is stunning what kind of conversations you can have on the floor with people, like when you walk around and you're there in person, like just in ideas that people will kind of run by you, or like saying like, have you thought about this? Like you should be doing that. We would be interested in that. You get so much feedback. That in itself is just plain fun for someone in business, like this kind of seeing, like interacting with, when in a lot of cases we interact with our business partners, retailers and things like that. You get to talk to the people that consume your product. That's the best of all worlds. Like you get the best feedback ever, and it's fun. So what you get on top of that is, when I'm looking at the marketing statistics, there is 10 plus million people that kind of saw like that somehow saw either a snippet or the entire live stream. You get like all this engagement, like, that reverberates beyond borders, that kind of goes global. I'll give you an example. Like I have like one of the people in Europe that I deal with on a frequent basis. She called me like after the first speedbusting competition in San Diego, and she was like, my son has been watching you on the live stream, and she's based in Germany. She was like, he's like completely, like his mind is blown. Like he loves puzzling. And, he had no idea that this thing even existed. Like, and I saw you guys wearing a t-shirt, like we had like a Puzzle Shark t-shirt, like I think that was our own team, like that speed puzzled for like one of those things that we did.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have one of those t-shirts like still available? And I said, like, we actually only literally made the t-shirts for the team that was there, but I'll throw mine in the laundry. He can have mine. Her son watches like and that's not because she knows me. He watches every single one of those speed puzzling competitions, like when they're happening. So like, the engagement that you get from that community, and then the brand awareness and people that talk to each other and to their friends is, from a marketing perspective, certainly very valuable.
Did you guys see that coming out of the 2022 competition? Because you would have basically 2 years before the 2024 competition. I'm just wondering, what kind of feedback did you get in terms of internal metrics that really drove you to go what seems like even further in the 2024 competition with, rather than just custom first run puzzles. Now we've got what look like early commission puzzles. So it
Yeah.
looks like you guys went to the next level. What
Yeah.
drove you?
Well, what drove us, this was like at the end of the 2022, when it was all said and done, we got together. I remember like we sat in the conference room of that hotel with the US national jigsaw team and kind of were just chatting. You know, we were all tired. They were especially tired.
Yeah.
And they it was very heavy lifting. And, you know, they're all volunteers. Like this is not a professional organization where some paid team members kind of do that. And my question to that team, which was kind of, you know, in hindsight, pretty inappropriate, I would say, like I was asking them the typical business question. And I said, so like, where do we take this from here? This was awesome. Like, what's the next big thing that we could do? And they all
I bet
looked
they
at
were
me
thrilled to hear that.
and they all looked at me and they said, Thomas, right now you're just tired. we don't even know. We don't even know whether we want to do or like whether we can do a speed puzzling competition in 2023.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, yeah, I hear you. I guess that was not the right question to ask at this point in time. Give everyone some time to regroup and think about this. But we all had fun. Like we certainly agreed we all had fun and like we wanted to do more. So then it was about like finding the right venue, like and also for us to kind of say, okay, what can we do to help? If we truly want to take our ambition seriously and saying like we want to be the brand that is known for you know, driving and helping with speed puzzling competitions, we also need to provide a helping hand like to volunteer organizations like the US National Jigsaw Team, right? So we were talking about like, can we bring a larger retailer in, as we were talking about, like, wouldn't it be cool if we could kind of establish regional chapters and like, you know, what would that look like? You know, if like, you know, you do one national competition in a venue once a year, shouldn't a national competition, if you look at anything in sports, you know, that usually you have like qualifiers, right? That happen like, you know, you have regional champions, you know, and then the regional champions compete. What would that look like? We're by no means there, but that is ultimately something I think that would be really cool if you could like, you know, being puzzling part of the Olympics, I think would be really cool. If you could kind of get there, that's the like long-term goal. Like that would be a really cool thing to do, is like making puzzling part of the Olympics. I'm not sure what needs to be done there, but that's the idea. We kind of said, well, we have one of our largest retailers for our puzzles is Barnes and Noble. And so we said, well, you know, Barnes and Noble is doing business nationally in the US. You know, they have stores in pretty much every single, I do believe, in every single state. Could we bring Barnes and Noble in as one of the retailers that could help with that? And so we kind of sponsored a trip for the Barnes and Noble team to kind of join us like the next year and kind of just take a look, because initially they didn't feel like this was such a big thing. And we were like, we think you should just go there and watch. And, you know, like everyone else that has seen this before, their minds were blown. So like, you know, that helped us then to at least start doing puzzle events, the speed puzzling competitions in 50 of the 600 plus Barnes and Noble stores. I think that happened last year, and more to come this year. Now Books A Million is interested. So book retailers that have spaces where they do book readings and things like that help. You know, you can't do that with every single retailer. You have to have a certain scale. So this is all meant to ultimately scale into something bigger. And we're kind of just trying to figure out which area do we need to tackle first to kind of get there.
Interesting. So you guys are spreading out in all kinds of directions on the competition front. So it's not just one specific or country specific competitions that have you engaged.
Yeah.
The way that you engage in nationals brings a certain level of thoughtfulness and quality. And I'm curious as to how that ramps down into more local and regional competitions.
You are absolutely correct. And that's outlining one of the challenges that, like, as you're thinking about that process, like trying to figure out what does that mean for the product development process. If you want it to be number one, the question, would you need to do that? Right? That's the first question you have to ask yourself. Like, would you, for call it a regional competition or a local competition, would you actually have to have puzzles that have never been seen before? Is there a different way of doing it? Could you do something in a white box, like, you know, like you don't know what image you're going to be getting, so like you can't train beforehand. But you know, it's that type of thing. You don't have to produce a new puzzle. You're only doing it for regionals and nationals, but not for locals. That's kind of currently what we're trying to think through. What does that mean from a product development capacity perspective and resource perspective? What does it mean from a financial perspective? Like, is that doable? Like all those things, we're not there yet, like in having properly defined that, but we're also not there yet in having the proper system of like all of that really having scaled to that degree. Like it's like feeling, for right now at least, that's my understanding, like we're feeling our way in. But it's lots of discussions around that topic internally.
I want to skip back to the idea of choosing puzzles for competitions, especially unreleased puzzles. My understanding is that for something on the scale of the US Nationals, you guys have a selection of puzzles that are on your mind that the USA JPA can choose from. And so I would love a bit more insight as to what that general process is. Like, if that is true, how do you guys come up with those puzzles? Are they puzzles made specifically for the competition or held back from the catalog? Because I imagine this must happen 12, 15 months in advance of the actual competition. How does image selection work?
Happens quite a bit in advance, like the image selection, like what we have, like one, even for speed puzzlers, like everything that I just mentioned earlier in the conversation, what makes a good puzzle image still matters.
Yep.
Right? Detail matters, everything. Like we're still talking imagery and we're talking art on little tiny cardboard pieces that you're kind of putting together. So like the art selection for speed puzzling competitions isn't actually that different from what we employ in our standard kind of range. If you want to call it if you want to call the speed puzzling range the speed puzzling range and the standard range the standard range.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, what we are trying to do is come up with the best puzzle images possible. That has not changed, and that's not changing for any release that we're doing for speed puzzling competitions. And the goal that we have is to kind of basically use this as, I would almost call this as a launch platform. So like you're only releasing those puzzles like during the competition one by one. Then they're releasing on our online shop like in real time, so to speak, so that people that are watching the live stream or that are interested but can't join, like for the competition itself, can purchase them.
Yeah.
Barnes and Noble usually buys some of those puzzles and kind of has them in their stores, available in stores for people to purchase. And ultimately, for right now, like everything that we kind of release at the US Nationals, here's the draw, also comes with the special packaging, which has the US National Jigsaw Organization logo on the packaging.
Yep.
We then transition those puzzles into our standard line or like into our catalog, like the following year, and or in some cases the fall. I think it's for right now, like I'm not entirely sure. So like that's the detail in some cases, like where I might be a bit off. I think it goes into our standard catalog like the following year. So like initially it just lives on our online shop, like it's being released at the competition, and then it becomes part of our standard range. The competition logo goes away on the packaging, and then it becomes part of our standard range and the general kind of puzzle offering that we have in the marketplace the following year.
I know there's a lot of demand from outside of the US the moment those puzzles drop. So the fact that folks have to wait, half a year to a year for those puzzles, I know is a source of aggravation for people who just want to get their hands on it right away. Is there any ability to collapse the timeline between when things are released in the US and making them available to Europe and beyond?
Oh, we're planning to kind of do exactly that, in a sense of like, since the manufacturing of those puzzles happens in Europe, the simple way of like solving for that issue is you hold some of your production quantity back and you make it available on the online shops in Europe so that people can buy those puzzles there. That's the fastest to market. I do actually believe we did that last year, like with the US Nationals. Puzzles were available in Europe, maybe not in the quantity, and that's always a forecasting thing. Maybe not in the quantity that we should have had them available for. I think they sold out, and they sold out fairly fast. But that you can dial in. That was the first year, I think, where we tried that, where we said, okay, like those puzzles should be available in Europe also at the same time. And we're doing similar things when, like with Worlds, we had some of the Worlds Jigsaw puzzles that were released during the Worlds competition available in our online shop. We also sold out. We also didn't bring in enough, right? That's kind of trying to forecast for like what is your potential demand that we haven't completely dialed in yet.
That's a good problem to have, though. I know that we were on the receiving end of desperately trying to get a hold of some of the European puzzles through the US channels.
Yeah, I know.
With all of this, the pipeline for getting a puzzle into a competition, I know that especially at Worlds, there have been a couple of incidents where the image has leaked. And, my perspective on that is that it leaked because, at least in the most recent case, people were actively trying to find it, which, if you are looking for a competitive edge, that may be a thing that you engage in. So I'm curious as to how you think about the security and the secrecy of a puzzle that is bound for a competition like US Nationals, and how hard it is, if at all, to keep that image secret.
It's harder than you think it should be. This short answer. Uh,
I think
when
we've
you
seen
talk,
that.
yeah, absolutely. When you're developing art, and when like just product managers across the globe are sharing like virtually like imagery, and they're talking through things, and then you have company asset systems that kind of have assets up, and someone makes a mistake and doesn't set a check mark on something kind of that's supposed to be like this is not supposed to be shared, you can't access it, things like that. We have learned a thing or two. I think we're still in the process of learning. Like, yes, we actually, our ambition is to kind of have this 100%, 150% button up and secret. Cannot be shared, isn't going anywhere, isn't going into some automated data feeds that some retailers kind of have like in Europe and things like that. We have found out things about our own processes that we didn't even know existed, like in doing that. We have gotten better at it, I believe, also due to the fact that we have this other kind of category called Lorcana trading card games, where like, set releases that are highly anticipated also are supposed to be secret until we kind of decide that they're being released. Like, we've learned a thing or two from that team and the internal collaboration. And even on the Lorcana side, we haven't, in some cases, been able to 100% kind of button this up and like not have the information out. So like, it's a constant struggle. We're not the CIA either, or like whatever department you might want to use for reference. Like it isn't as easy as I thought it should be.
Is one of those things that probably before at least Worlds and the Lorcana series, maybe you didn't have a lot of need for keeping things that level of a secret?
None whatsoever. In fact, like, you're to that point, like most companies are kind of, in most of those cases, I mean, we bring product to market. We want people to talk about it, and we want them to know about it. Like, you can't, your instinct is to kind of talk about your product and
Like,
to kind of
please look at
publish
my
it.
stuff.
Yeah. I mean, we are at the heart and the core of what we do is like we're a publishing company, and publishing, I think the word stands, there's no further explanation. So like, you're publishing things. So like, the natural instinct is like, things go out and you talk about them, that you actually want to be secretive about them is not the natural instinct that we have, but that we should have in this case, and kind of that we kind of need to own a bit further.
I want to switch gears, as I know we're starting to run out of time, and there's a couple of topics I want to hit on, but one of them, which is sort of has been discussed a fair amount, is the Ravensburger cut. So you guys have, unlike many other companies, you have for a 500 piece puzzle. Correct me if I'm wrong. A standard cut that is universal.
Yes. I think they call it ribbon cut, if I'm not mistaken, or whatever. There's a ribbon cut and there's a random cut. I think those are the two kind of words.
Yeah, so you guys have a ribbon cut, but importantly, it's the same cut. Like, intentionally, you have die cut craft persons who hand make
Yeah.
the die to be the same for every 500 piece puzzle for every country, so that every time you run out of one, every time one gets too dull to use anymore, there's a new one that has exactly that same cut.
Actually, not exactly the same cut. Sorry, I need to correct you there.
Tell me. Yeah, please.
To a degree, it's the same cut, and to a degree, and to a large degree, it's not. So it starts with the custom tool making process, right? Like, imagine a puzzle tool for die cutting looking like an oversized cookie cutter. That's almost like, with lots of pieces, right? Like all those puzzle pieces, like all the individual pieces that are kind of bent, like hand bent and hammered into a sheet of plywood, look like little cookie cutters that are all kind of coming together to kind of form this die. As this is handmade, and every single puzzle die cutting tool is custom made and hand drawn initially and then kind of custom bent. No one tool is exactly the same. The general kind of cut pattern is the same, but like a specific, let's say, row number 5 and column number 10 in a 500 piece puzzle or something like that, if you kind of look at it that way, that puzzle piece that sits exactly there is not the same puzzle piece depending on which 500 piece puzzle die that you're using. So think about it that way, like a puzzle tool usually in the factory stays sharp for about 100,000 cuts or so. You can go and resharpen that, maybe use that for a couple more cuts, but at some point in time, you have to throw that tool away. Like if you don't, what is happening, that's diving a bit deeper into the manufacturing process. If you don't, what you will see is a lot of dust in your boxes, because like when you're cutting paper and cardboard with something that's not sharp, you create, like you're cutting cellulose fiber, and you're creating dust in the process because that fiber is not cut cleanly. You will also have sections in a puzzle that will hang together where your tool doesn't
Mm.
fully cut through those anymore because it's not sharp enough. A puzzle tool, as you can imagine, is quite expensive. It's probably the most expensive part in the entire process is the tool making itself. And if you want to make a cheaper puzzle, which we don't, the easiest way to do that is kind of use your tooling for 200,000 cuts or 300,000 cuts, and you're just, puzzle pieces that hang together, dust in the box doesn't matter much to you. It does matter to us, a big deal. So we always have, like in a really busy day or like week in the factory, we kind of go through one tool and it's done.
Hmm.
And you need a new one, right? So like we always have several of those tools. Like, it's not just one tool, like 400 or 500 piece puzzle. There's probably, I don't know, 10 or 15 or 20 of those tools. And yes, while they generally speaking look the same, they aren't the same because like the puzzle pieces themselves, the individual pieces wouldn't fit in the same puzzle that's cut with a different 500 piece tool.
Sure. I think the consistency of the pieces that you guys create, whether they're varied and they don't fit together, they're still generally shaped and generally positioned in the same place, is
Yep.
allowing for folks to folks who have this capability to
Yeah.
commit some of the parts of the cut to memory, which,
Yeah.
for your regular consumer is not a big deal, but it is an interesting conversation in the speed puzzling community about that additional capability that some people can bring to the table. And I'm personally interested in, like, it would be great if there were speed puzzling specific cuts that people couldn't have memorized. To your earlier point about having a box with no picture on it, right? Like, it's, can we do anything to make things as level a playing field as possible so that people are just bringing their raw ability to a new image without some of these other skills necessarily being required?
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
I mean, understand that that's super expensive and logistically challenging, so I don't expect anything, but
No, it is like there's a couple considerations. We've been, loosely at this stage, loosely been talking about those, which is one of the reasons we have the puzzle cut that we currently have is a strong belief that when you look at, and this is coming from the regular puzzler space, that when you have a puzzle and when it's done, you want to have the die lines of the puzzle. That's what we call like, the cuts. You want to have the die lines of the puzzle recede into the background. You want to see an image, right? Like rather than kind of a random cut like of pieces coming together where the pieces kind of are more visible, the individual pieces. Is that the best thing for speed puzzling? Probably not. Like it certainly levels the playing field if you have just one aspect, and the one aspect is the image that drives everything, and not the can someone remember the cut? Can they not remember the cut? Like, is this kind of the factor? We haven't come to a conclusion yet. I can tell you whenever we kind of change our cut, and this has got nothing to do with speed puzzling, we get a lot of negative feedback from puzzle enthusiasts of like, this
sure.
is not the Ravensburger cut. We don't like that. So like the reason why we believe like that ribbon cut that we're doing is the right cut, because like we get this affirmed by puzzle enthusiasts, like, every step of the way. And the speed puzzling community here might be very different. So like, figuring out, can we do that for the speed puzzling community? Is that the right solution or is it not? We haven't come to a conclusion yet.
The last major topic that I wanna touch on is something that has come up a lot in conversation this last year, especially. You mentioned AI earlier. AI is an area where everybody is actively trying to figure out how to deal with it, right? It's an explosion of capability. At the same time, people are really concerned, validly so, that it is a potential erosion of certain skills that are out there in the world. I would love to see, I'd love to understand where Ravensburger is in this sort of exploration and how you're thinking about AI with respect to puzzles.
So where we are at this stage in time, as you're saying, like it's continuously evolving. So like we're watching the space like as any company should, like for all kinds of reasons, like in our business, not just kind of art and illustrations and puzzles. Is one thing that really sets ourselves apart is the uniqueness of the images that we do, is the collaboration with artists, like people, not a machine, not something that kind of takes art from spaces where it's potentially not protected or infringing like on other people. I mean, like we rely with our business, we very strongly rely on like having protected pieces of art and things that are not infringing on other people's work. So we very strongly at this stage believe that the human touch in the art that they kind of bring to the table and that we develop together with them is something that at this stage is completely irreplaceable, and is not only irreplaceable but is also really really important to us, because there's a lot of feedback and a lot of like interaction that comes to that goes into all those briefings and into that product development process that we don't feel is properly can properly be handled through machine or like a prompt or a language model or whatever that might be, right? Now, we have taken steps where, we are asking anyone that kind of, if we buy art, I would say like call it from the rack somewhere. We have it in our contractual language that, the artist or art agency needs to disclose in case AI or AI tools were used in the process. This is a fairly new development. We didn't have that before. We learned about that when we were then being told, like, you have an image here. Like I think one of the puzzle competitions had like one or two of like, AI produced art images
Yep.
where we had no idea that they were actually done through AI. When you looked more closely, yes, you could see that. Could have a long conversation. Should we have seen it or not? We just didn't. It's a fact, right? And then we were like, we need to ensure that like our contracts that we have with art agencies and artists incorporate that. And that is the tricky part. When artists concept art, they sometimes use tools. It's like almost every software these days that you're using, whether you know it or not, like that actually has an AI component in it, right?
Absolutely.
So like we're also asking artists clearly like to disclose like whatever they're doing in their process in case they're using AI tools. It's fine if it's original art. Like if ultimately the output and what we're getting like as art for a puzzle is original art and is done by the artist and not by a machine, that is acceptable. Like, that is like, whether someone used, what's the best way of describing that? Before Photoshop existed, everything would be hand illustrated, right?
Yeah.
Then with Photoshop, you can do that on a computer. You can take elements, you can save them, you can kind of bring them in to your piece of art, all that type of stuff. That's a process that's kind of, been for the last, I don't know, 20 years, or ever since Photoshop existed, that artists have employed. It's a bit similar on the AI front. So like if someone uses certain AI tools to create an image, that is acceptable as long as the image is not generated by AI, but by an artist. So you might have a one or other component in there, like where there's a tool being used that kind of, Photoshop these days has AI in it. So like, that is a bit tricky. Like we're asking artists to kind of disclose that to us so that we have proper understanding of what their process included. But what is not acceptable is like having someone give us an image that was kind of just done through a prompt with a chatbot, and here's the image that was created, and that's kind of then kind of what we're putting to market.
Awesome. I think that at this point, you've given me a whole bunch of your time and I deeply appreciate it, but I think that we can go ahead and wrap up here. Is there any place that I should direct people to follow either you or the company or get more information?
Well, I think the best way of following us is like our Ravensburger Instagram page, like either locally, like we have one that I think is Ravensburger NA on Instagram, or Ravensburger Global on Instagram. I think both of those are interesting to kind of watch because you sometimes get to see some things that you don't get to see just for the North America market, just for like fun and content. That's the best way of doing it. Like, people can certainly follow me on LinkedIn. I'm not a very frequent poster of things. Same on Reddit. I just don't have enough time. I wish I had more. I have to retire before I can do that. But like, there's lots of ways of following us. Like, we have a newsletter subscription on our website. If people are interested in kind of what's going on, like with puzzles and like the puzzles that we're offering from limited edition jobs that we have been doing, like in and on our website and things like that, go to ravensburger.com. Subscribe to the newsletter. That would be awesome. Like, you're going to get a lot of news, promotions, all kinds of things, new puzzle releases and or puzzle releases that are happening like during the speed puzzling events.
Thomas Kaeppeler, thank you so much for joining me.
Rob, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. It was fun. Do this anytime.
Thanks for listening to Peace Talks. You can follow the podcast on Instagram at peace_talks, and you can send email to peacetalkscast@gmail.com.